Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're unpacking a really monumental and honestly deeply tragic shift in ancient Israel's leadership. We're looking at the transition from a loose collection of tribes guided by judges straight into a centralized monarchy. And this isn't just some dry historical transition. It's a completely fascinating story about human ambition, immense psychological pressure, and the incredibly heavy price of compromised values.
So, what actually happens when a nation demands exactly what it shouldn't have? Let's dive right into this story by looking at a profound political crisis, one that was triggered by a single, highly dangerous demand from the elders of Israel. Because, as we'll see, sometimes getting exactly what you ask for is actually the start of your own undoing.
All right, part one, a demand for a king to judge us like all the nations. The people were just completely fed up, and they decided they desperately wanted a human monarch. To really understand this shift, we have to look at the judge Samuel. As he grew older, his sons started taking bribes and perverting justice, which basically prompted the elders of Israel to issue an ultimatum. Now, God told Samuel to go ahead and grant their request, but to solemnly warn them about the heavy, heavy cost this would incur. Samuel laid out exactly what a monarchy extracts. He warned them that a king will draft your sons for his chariots, he'll take your daughters to be cooks and bakers, he'll seize the absolute best of your fields, and demand a tenth of your sheep. Basically, you're going to become his servants. But despite this incredibly stark warning, the people flat out refused to listen. They insisted they needed a king to fight their battles.
Which brings us to part two. Enter Saul the Benjamite, a choice young man, literally higher than any of the people.
Saul's rise to power is wild. It is incredibly rapid, and he is highly, highly reluctant. Visually, he fits exactly what you'd think a king should look like. From his shoulders upward, he's taller than anyone else in Israel. But his story starts out with him just running a mundane errand, looking for his father's lost donkeys. That everyday search leads him straight to the seer Samuel, who surprises him with a feast and then secretly anoints him with a vial of oil. But the true irony here? That happens on the day of the public assembly. When all the tribes are gathered and Saul is officially chosen by lot to be king, they literally cannot find the guy. It turns out this towering, impressive figure is hiding among the luggage. So right out of the gate, day one, we're dealing with an incredibly insecure monarch.
Part 3, Victory at Jabesh Gilead. This is really Saul's absolute peak moment of success.
Okay, so despite that initial reluctance, Saul is very quickly put to the test. Nahash the Ammonite besieges the city of Jabesh Gilead and offers them just a horrifying treaty. Nahash says he'll only spare the city if he can gouge out all of their right eyes, as a violent reproach upon Israel. Now, when Saul hears this news, the Spirit of God comes upon him, and his righteous anger is kindled. He takes a yoke of oxen, chops them into pieces, and essentially sends these chopped up oxen through the ancient mail system all throughout Israel with a fierce warning. Whoever doesn't come out to fight, the exact same will be done to their oxen. It's an intense, almost absurdly dramatic move, but man, it works. The fear of the Lord falls on the people. A massive force of 330,000 men unifies under Saul, and they completely massacre the Ammonite army before the midday sun is even hot. So Saul proves he's actually capable of incredible, unifying leadership when he's guided by divine purpose, and this firmly secures his kingship in the eyes of the people.
But then we hit part 4, the unlawful sacrifice. Let's look at the pressure of leadership at Gilgal. Every classic tragedy has its turning point, and Saul's fatal flaws really begin to show when he faces the immense psychological pressure of war. He was explicitly commanded to wait 7 days in Gilgal for Samuel to arrive and offer the burnt sacrifices. Meanwhile, the Philistines are amassing a terrifyingly large army. Seeing this massive enemy gathered, Saul's own men start trembling and eventually scattering away from him. With his army dwindling and that 7th day ticking away, Saul just panics. Out of sheer desperation, he crosses a sacred boundary. He usurps the priest's role and forces himself to offer the burnt offering, just trying to seek God's favor before the battle.
And wouldn't you know it, literally as soon as he finishes the offering, Samuel arrives. Saul tries to justify his actions. He's blaming the scattering troops, he's blaming the delayed prophet, but Samuel delivers a crushing blow. He looks at Saul and tells him he's acted foolishly, that he has not kept the commandment of the Lord. And because of this inability to just trust the process and obey the rules, God has sought a man after his own heart. Saul's dynasty is not going to endure.
Which leads us to part 5, the Amalekite disobedience, a devastating failure to follow direct commands.
Saul's inability to follow instructions already cost him his dynasty, but his most devastating, final failure was actually still to come. Later on in his reign, Saul gets a very clear, completely uncompromising directive from God regarding the Amalekites. The command is explicit: smite Amalek, utterly destroy all that they have, and spare absolutely nothing. So Saul gathers his army and defeats them. But instead of total obedience, Saul offers partial compliance. He completely destroys everything that is vile and refuse, but he deliberately spares King Agag alive. And it doesn't stop there. Saul and his people also keep the very best of the spoils: the sheep, the oxen, the fatlings, the lambs. They keep it all for themselves. When Samuel comes out and confronts him about the bleating of the sheep he's suddenly hearing, Saul tries to justify his disobedience by claiming, "Oh, the people saved the best livestock to sacrifice to God." But Samuel just cuts right through those religious-sounding excuses with a devastating rebuke. He asks Saul, "Hath the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord?" And then he follows it up with this timeless principle: "Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice." Samuel establishes once and for all that true authority requires uncompromising integrity, not partial obedience disguised as religious devotion.
Stripped of all his excuses, we finally see the tragic confession of a hollow leader. Saul replies, "I have sinned, for I have transgressed the commandments of the Lord, because I feared the people and obeyed their voice." It's right there. Saul admits his fatal flaw. Rather than standing firm in his duty and holding the line as a leader, he caved. He bent to peer pressure and the desires of his subjects. And finally, part 6, the king is rejected, the ultimate tragic cost of compromised values. Because Saul rejected the word of the Lord, Samuel declares that the Lord has definitively rejected him from being king over Israel. As Samuel turns to walk away, Saul desperately grabs the skirt of Samuel's mantle, and it tears. Samuel uses this as a profound metaphor right on the spot, stating, "The Lord hath rent the kingdom of Israel from thee this day, and hath given it to a neighbor of thine that is better than thou." It's just a heart-wrenching image of a man violently clinging to the power he's already irrevocably lost through his own choices. As we wrap up this explainer, let this piece of ancient history serve as a mirror for our own choices today. Look, Saul had the appearance, he had the position, he even had the initial successes, but he completely failed to cultivate the internal character required to actually sustain his leadership. He traded obedience for public approval, and in the end, it cost him absolutely everything. So the final thought I want to leave you with is this: when the pressure inevitably mounts in your own life, will you stand by your core responsibilities, or will the fear of others dictate your path? Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive. I'll see you next time.